Ah yes, that was when your cousin Marty fell into the sewer. He thought it was a swimming pool.
His clothes smelled like sewer rats for weeks.
Ah, and that's where Aunt Jenneth almost got eaten by that shark.
Honey, she did get eaten by that shark. We went to her funeral.
That's not important, let's move on.
Honey, she is your sister.
Oh yes, and that's where that spider monkey came out of the sky. And then there was this crazy cat thing.
Honey, are you sure you weren't on drugs at the time?
Wow, Mom and Dad, that's really interesting. Can I go play Final Fantasy now?
Final Fantasy? Final Fantasy? You incorrigible reprobate! Don't you ever talk about the game in my household again!
Chances are you've been hungry at some point in your life. Maybe you can relate, but on days when you feel more impatient rather than less, you might be tempted to assuage that hunger by creating a meal in the form of some impossibly odd concoction of ingredients lying around in your fridge. Sometimes you can get lucky and your stomach accepts whatever you put into it as valid. Other times though, you get unlucky and it says, "That wasn't food, what are you putting in here?" And then it makes you all the hungrier for a proper meal. That feeling is exactly what I felt after finishing the role-playing game Drakkhen. You see, Drakkhen is composed of the wholesome ingredients that make up a good RPG, but the recipe that combines those ingredients needs some work overall. Let's start with the story. On the whole, Drakkhen has an interesting plot filled with political bodies vying for power. That being said, brace yourself, cause a ton of plot is about to happen. In the past, dragons and humans lived in the same world, where humans have been killing dragons to the point of annihilation. The gods of the world warned the humans to stop, but they didn't, and so they wiped the dragons out. Seeing this, the gods took pity on the dragons and created a new world for the Drakkhen, a creature that is a mix of dragon and human, and hence the name Drakkhen. The world was named Drakkhen Island, and it was split into 4 quadrants of earth, water, air, and fire, with a prince and princess Drakkhen ruling each quadrant respectively. Time passed, bringing us to the present time where an uprising is occurring amongst some of the Drakkhen, who want to destroy the human world, likely in revenge for the slaughter of their dragon ancestors. Allow me to stop right there for a moment, and if you'll permit me, I'd like to share a few interesting theories I have about this lore, starting with the dragons themselves. As stated, after the dragons were destroyed, Drakkhen Island was created for the Drakkhen, which are a dragon-human hybrid. However, if you look at the instruction manual, you'll find that there are 4 dragon kings that live on Drakkhen Island, of whom the 8 Drakkhen royalty are actually offspring of. But how can this be? The opening told us that the dragons were wiped out. It's possible that after the eradication of the dragons, when the gods took pity on them and created Drakkhen Island, they brought back to life 4 dragons and set them up as kings. More likely though, I think, is that wiped out in this context is not a phrase that implies totality, but merely a general overall destruction of most of the race. This could mean that only 4 dragons survived and then escaped to Drakkhen Island when it was created. Regardless of which is true though, you might be wondering, if there are dragon kings, why is it called Drakkhen Island? Well, I have another theory to explain just that. First off, we need to identify the nature of dragon reproduction. Let's assume it's similar to most lizards, requiring a male and female entity. The 4 dragons left are kings, so we can assume that they are all male and likely unable to produce any kind of offspring even amongst each other. Now we know that the gods were able to create a landmass for the dragons to live on, but what if they did not have the power to bring dead dragons, specifically female dragons, back to life? If this was true, it may be that the only solution available to the gods that could continue the lineage of the dragons was to mix their DNA with that of another living thing, and for this purpose the gods chose the DNA of humans. The caveat to this unincreasable integer of dragons is that you can encounter any of the 4 dragon types within the game in combat, and even though they are optional and the strongest if not the strongest enemy in the game, it is possible to kill them. Even though I never accomplished the feat in the game myself, I would assume that even if you killed a dragon, it would be possible to run into that same dragon type again, either in combat or through a cinematic like the one at the end of the game. If this would occur, we would have to find a way to illustrate just how there are more than 4 original dragons. We could explain this recurrence of the dragons by reasoning that the dragon was never actually killed, merely defeated, and that it regained its power shortly after. We could also chalk it up to simply being a game mechanic, included in the game so that we could have a powerful foe to face at the end of our journey should we wish to live up to the challenge. Personally, I think it is the latter, but regardless of which is the answer, both still support the idea that dragons are finite and unable to produce more of themselves, which then leads us back to the idea of dragons and the question, why did the gods choose to mix dragons with humans? Well, I believe that the gods did it so that the dragons would have hope for the future. Genocide is a terrible act caused by an us versus them mentality. The quickest way to find traits to discriminate against someone is to look at their physical appearance. We are never told why the humans wiped out the dragons, but it would seem that it was because they were, in fact, dragons. By mixing the dragons with humans, the dragons become more human-like, both in name and physical appearance. Is it possible that the gods were hoping to create a similarity, a common bond between the Drakkens and the humans, in hopes that another genocide attempt would be less likely to occur in the future? I think so. Just look at the royalty Drakkhen compared to the common Drakkens that you find throughout the game. The common Drakkens are mostly human-sized, sharing physical traits more similar to humans than their royalty Drakkens, who I assume are their parents. This would seem to support the case that the further down the family Drakkhen tree that you get from the ancestor dragons, the more human the offspring looks. This is of course just speculation, but I see no reason this couldn't be true. Regardless, let's get back on track for the main plot of the game. So at present time, 4 humans have been brought to Drakkhen Island by the gods in order to give humanity a chance to stop the Drakkhen conflict from destroying both the human and Drakkhen worlds. The adventurers are told that humanity will be spared if they can collect 8 gems called Dragon Tears, of which each Drakkhen royalty possesses 1. Okay, now you might hate me for this one, but we're going to go through the entire game's story at like warp speed here, because as you hear it, you should start to realize something about the way it's put together. To start off, visit Hordkin, the Earth Prince, who will ask you to tell his sister Hordka, the Earth Princess, that he wants to see her. Arrive at Hordka's castle to find out that Hordken had attacked his sister's castle during a time that she had been sheltering humans. It's a mystery as to how these humans are on the island at all. We don't even know who they are or how they got here. We only get to meet one briefly later in the game, but it is likely that Hordka's sheltering of them was the cause for her brother's attack. Since the castle is in ruins, but the Earth Princess and her people seem to be alive, we can reason that her brother must have spared her in the hopes that she would come to her senses and stop aiding the people group that caused their ancestors' destruction. Unplanned by Hordkin, though, was that Drakkhen, the Water Prince, has already attacked the Earth Princess and taken her and the humans prisoner in his castle. Take this news back to Hordkin, who asks you to go to Drakkhen's castle, giving you the strength to enter the other 3 zones of the game, which until this point were closed off. At Drakkhen's castle, you release a human prisoner who informs you that Hordka was actually taken to the castle of the Air Princess Nachtika. The prisoner has no idea where Nachtika's castle actually is, but he says that her brother, the Air Prince Drakkhen, might know. As it turns out, Drakkhen, the Air Prince, is a bit of a coward and had his original castle destroyed by the Fire Troops while he did nothing but hide.
Everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
He warns you that his sister wants to kill Hordka for her gem, who, if you've gotten lost in all the names, is the Earth Princess, whose capture we are investigating by the request of Hordkin, her brother. Nachtigan kills the gatekeeper to his sister's castle, allowing you to enter. Through a series of letters, we find that the Wind Princess, Nachtika, is in love with one of the princes. Using process of elimination, it is either the Water Prince, supported by the fact that the human you rescued was a prisoner of his castle, or it could be Drakkhen, supported by the fact that you find corpses of her troops next to his near the end of the game. Whoever you think she is betrothed to, one thing is clear, that she has been acting under the prince's orders for some time. Additionally, it is evident that this chick is crazy evil too. One of the letters contains evidence that she is planning to kill her brother and the Earth Prince as a sacrifice to the primordial gods. Finally, in the pit of Nachtika's castle, you rescue Hordka from her captivity. She lets you know she supports the cause of the 9th tier. The 9th tier is formed when the 8 other tiers come together and is supposed to save the world, somehow. Information about the 9th tier comes from the enigmatic priests of Anak strewn about the 4 regions who churn out cryptic nonsensical dialogue indiscernible beyond the 9th tier is good and you should probably go get it. Hordka gives you her gem and tells you to go visit Drakkhen, the Water Princess. Drakkhen is the leader of the 9th tier organization who mentions the Genesis, which I don't really understand, but if the priests of Anak can be trusted, it has something to do with the world repeating itself in destruction, or something. Drakkhen warns you the Fire Prince is a threat. You kill Hordkin, the Earth Prince, before he can join the Fire Troops. Drakkhen congratulates you, giving you her gem, but then tells you she hasn't heard from the princess, Hazulka. With about 30 minutes left in the game, the story writers emulate Shakespeare's Macbeth, and that everyone starts to die at the end of the story all at once. You find Hazulka is dead, presumably killed by her brother Hazulken. The cowardly Air Prince pops up again and angrily declares that he will personally seek revenge against Hazulken for the death of Hazulka. He promptly then tells you to go out and do it for him. That's not even how revenge works, guy. Picking up the late Hazulka's gem means that we have 4 gems in total. You revisit Nachtika's castle and kill her, taking her gem. Nachtiken comes in claiming that there was nothing he could have done to save his sister, she had it coming, blah blah blah, and gives you his gem. You go back to Drakkhen, the Water Prince's castle, and slay him, taking his gem. Finally, you bust into Hazulken, the Fire Prince's castle, and slay him, taking the final 8th tier. You take all 8 gems to the center of the island where the 4 Dragon Kings descend and fuse the 8 gems into the 9th tier. The dragons then say some garbled nonsense about chaos and light and how peace has returned to the world. At the end of their speech, they charge the adventurers with returning to the human world to spread to humanity what they have learned while on Drakkhen Island so that the war does not happen again. Okay, we made it. That is the story of Drakkhen, and I know that was a lot to cover, but I felt it was important to understanding the game. First, I actually feel like Drakkhen has an interesting story, and I wanted to share it with you, restructuring it in a way that I hope made a little bit more sense than what the game gives us. Secondly, and more importantly though, you can surely see just how confusing this game's plot is. The dragons' names are all impossible to pronounce, and impossibly similar to one another's through their incessant use of KHE and KHA in their names, making it not only incredibly hard to tell them apart, but also making it difficult to know which ones are good and which ones are evil and which ones I should even be caring about. Vocabulary in the game is sometimes used incorrectly. The dragons at the island center say that Hordkin's castle was left in ruins when really it was Hordkuz. The same 4 dragon kings use the word dragon instead of Drakkhen to describe their children. These and other inconsistencies are only made worse by the poor sentence structure and grammar used within the game. I've definitely seen worse translations, but what you'll find in Drakkhen isn't exactly amazing. Add to that the ambiguity of certain plot points like the origin of the humans on the island, what are the Anak, why do they support the cause of the 9th gem, why do they look like humans, etc, means that the game's story is more or less inaccessible on your first playthrough unless you were taking notes in a notebook or something while playing. Even if you did do this though, the book would be filled with a lot of unintelligible phrases that the characters sometimes give that just don't fit into the plot that I just completely skipped in my recap. What exactly does all is as the Phoenix mean? Why does the wandering old man pop up in Noctica's castle and tell you a pointless clue about secrets that just doesn't apply to anything? I also love the fact that in order to save the human world, you basically go to Drakkhen Island and do the same thing that the humans did to the dragons all those years ago. When you leave the island at the end, only 3 of the 8 Drakkhen royalty are even left alive, and one of them is a proven coward. Yes, truly, Dragon Kings, we have restored justice with wisdom and courage to the world, just as you have proclaimed, by killing all of your Drakkhen children before they could kill us. Overall, I like the idea of being stuck in a world where 8 dragon descendants are warring against each other, but the idea just gets lost in all this mentioned confusion. I wish I could say differently for the game's mechanics, but they too just don't quite reach the mark of what you need for a great RPG. The battle system's difficulty curve at the beginning of the game is spot on. It's easy enough that you'll have the time to learn what's going on as you excitedly watch your characters jump into action in early combat. When you manage to enter the first few dungeons, you'll even gleefully find that you can strip the walls bare for a bit of new equipment here and there. But stop right there, because what you just experienced right there is the full extent of what the actual playing part of the game is when it comes to combat. At no point in the game will you have to do anything else other than equip gear and watch your characters fight. It doesn't even seem to matter what spells you use in the game either. I kept my wizard using the same spell he learned at level 4 throughout the entire game, and he did just fine. A good part of the combat though are the monsters, which are worth mentioning just because of their sheer number. There wasn't a single point in the game where I wasn't running into new enemies, and I'm not talking about color swaps on sprites either, I mean actual unique enemies. There's even a set of special enemies that you fight in the form of constellations that come to life randomly at night. I have no idea why this happens, but I think the concept is really cool, and I don't think I've ever even seen it done in another game before. It creates excitement while wandering around on an otherwise uneventful overworld when the strange music cue plays and the stars suddenly start attacking you. Unfortunately though, as mentioned earlier, in spite of the impressive work done on the monster roster, a lot of the excitement of finding new creatures is taken away by the fact that once again, all you do is just watch your characters fight it. Your strategy never changes from monster to monster, and really all the monsters do generally the same thing, they just move around and attack. Equipment could have been done worse, but definitely could have been done better. The bow and arrow is your best bet to have through most of the game, since even though it doesn't have the highest attack power, it allows your characters to attack consistently, independent of the relationship between their position and the enemies. The small amount of equipment in the game is balanced out by the fact that it will constantly break, meaning that even near the end of the game, there will be times when the worst armor will be a welcome sight, because since your better armor broke a few battles ago, some armor is better than no armor. I really like this concept, as it keeps up the desire to look for good equipment, because you never know when your gear will be destroyed, but the rate at which it breaks is too high against certain enemies. The best idea seemed to be just to run away from those enemies, not because you couldn't take them out, but simply because you didn't want to lose half your team's armor just on some random enemy. Lastly, a look at spells just brings disappointment. As stated earlier, if you want to be offensive with your magic, it seems really not to matter which combat spell you're using. As for status-inducing spells, I fooled around a bit with confusion and paralysis, but combat was such a non-challenge that even if those spells were working, which I honestly couldn't tell if they were, the battles were over far too quickly for them to have any use or value. The utility spells like Light or Unlock have some novelty at first, but the last few castles will have you just casting them over and over just to see or unlock a door, that they just become annoying. I think the only utility spell that made me truly happy was the Priest's Speed spell, spell, since it let my snail speed party move faster on the overworld, but because all status effects end at the start of a new combat, it just got annoying to have to cast it over and over and over again. One of the biggest letdowns in the game came in the form of the teleportation spell. I can't even begin to understand the purpose of this spell. At first, I excitedly thought that it would let me teleport from dungeon to dungeon, eliminating the frustrating amount of time spent traveling in the game. Against my hopes though, the only thing teleportation does is bring you back to the beginning of a dungeon, which is completely useless because on the HUD, there's a button that does nearly the same thing for free. It takes you out of the dungeon. I don't understand. I mean, the only advantage I could even see being possible from the teleportation spell is in a select few dungeons where you could use the spell to port back to the beginning of the dungeon and explore a different part of the castle without respawning the monsters inside that you'd already killed. But not only would this only be applicable in a very select few cases, but the boon would be so minor that I probably wouldn't have even bothered with it. As a final diagnosis on the game's mechanics, is it unplayable? No. I mean, it's actually a very smooth combat system. I mean, your characters move around fairly fast, the combat doesn't necessarily feel like it drags, but I just found it to be such a turnoff that the player literally turns off their brain every time combat happens and just sits there and waits for it to be over. In overall conclusion, Drakkhen just leaves a very flat taste in my mouth. As you can see, there are a lot of features of the game that have merit. I don't think this video would have been quite so long if there wasn't. The problem is that with every step forward Drakkhen takes, it takes a step back. This is very odd to me because rarely do I play a game, or an RPG, a genre that I love, without having an opinion, good or bad, about it. But that's the case with Drakkhen. I'm just completely apathetic about the whole experience. The game originally came out for the Atari ST and the Amiga in 1989, and if I had played it on either of those systems at the time, I think I would have been very impressed, as this is one of the first games in history that featured a real-time combat system coupled with a 3D-like first-person overworld with a day and night system. Because of these new and generally untested features at the time, I would have been able to give immunity to the game's flaws. However, I can't give the SNES port these same immunities, because even though the game got a very nice graphical overhaul, the core problems of the game persist. I guess this is just one classic that's even too old school for me. I don't know. Do you like Drakkhen? Maybe if you were someone who grew up playing it, you have insight that I could never have. Even if you're not, I would love to hear any opinion you have on the game. At any rate, thanks for watching. This is SNES Legacy begging you that if you happen to bring 8 children into the world, please give them very distinguishable names from each other. Signing off.